holds the data that we need for that evidence, for the investigation, for the intelligence. Now, of course, it's available by subpoena. It's available by a lot of hard work and a lot of agents coming together over sometimes years to work these cases, which essentially defeats us from getting a lot of progress against a threat like that.
Yeah.
Not enough cases, not enough agents. Now, if we got to the point where we have in other instances, for example, our JTTFs, our Joint Terrorism Task Forces, where state, local, federal agencies are working together with representatives from the private sector to share information and to advance these cases to the point where they become effective and we can do more of them. The culmination of this across the country, if we had more of these task forces, would inform those decisions that we're trying to make overseas, right? We would have the intelligence we need with more of those cases, with more of those arrests, with more of that intelligence. So, it's definitely within our grasp.
So you're saying you need more personnel and more investigative resources. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. Similar to, again, ICAC, the Crimes Against Children Task Forces, which are predominantly staffed with local police departments, where those local and state resources can be used to support larger federal and international investigations. The effect of that is much greater than the individual investigations in local territories.
So there you're saying you want to deputize local law enforcement to help.
Absolutely. If there was an EJTF, an Elder Justice Task Force.
A what? Say it again.
I'm sorry, an EJTF, Elder Justice Task Force.
Yes.
In every major city in the United States.
And that allows you to deputize local law enforcement?
Absolutely.
I will work on that with you. What about tech? Do you have the appropriate technology? A lot of these scammers rely on voice recognition systems. They do deep fakes for voice, deep fakes for photographs, deep fakes for bank accounts, a letter from your bank saying, oh, you need to update your password. I mean, they're very sophisticated. Do you have the tech you need? Do you need a technology support?
And again, I'll remind the chamber that I'm retired from the FBI. And the FBI does grow and change every single day, but it is the government. That's why I think it's so important for that relationship and partnership with the private sector to bring cutting edge, current tech from those companies in on this fight. And I think it's a good option that would replace huge results. If we brought tech companies, banks, retailers, and telecoms together, stacking that sort of evidence and intelligence would create an avalanche of positive cases and intelligence.
Mr. Iacovella, what steps should Congress take to address continued investments by PRC companies by state and local pension funds? And are there any scenarios where the fiduciary duty owed to the pension funds may conflict with the national security concerns at a federal level?
I think Congress should take steps to ban PRC investments. I think that the fiduciary duty that's owed to the beneficiaries is very difficult to comply with because diligence in that country is non-existent, and you don't know whether or not the financial reporting, as Kevin said, is actually true and accurate because the Chinese Communist Party will assert a state secret or a national security privilege when you try to do an audit. So that's why I think they should be banned.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gillibrand. Ranking Member Krishnamurthy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's first take a look at some of these scam factories in Southeast Asia. Many of them are in Burma along the border with China. Mr. Finta, the FBI understands from Thai intelligence that these centers are a haven for Chinese mafia engaged in fraud and criminal acts, right?
Yes, I believe that is true.
And the CCP could work with local authorities in Burma to shut them down, but for years, CCP inaction allowed the syndicates to flourish, right?
Absolutely.
And as long as these centers, these scam factories continue to operate, these scammers will continue to target older Americans, right?
No doubt.
Let me turn to my next topic. It may not come as a big surprise, but the pictures that elderly Americans are getting scam texted every day are not actually of the people texting. On the Chinese internet, criminals steal hundreds of photos of real people from their social media accounts and then impersonate them with their stolen photos. So Mr. Finta, as you can see behind me, you can buy packages of hundreds of these photos for just 80 yuan, which is about $11, right, on the Chinese internet?
Yes, sir.
And using these fake personas, Chinese cyber gangs then target older adults and convince them to drain their savings. The CCP says they can't go after the scammers themselves since supposedly the scammers are seeking refuge in Southeast Asia. But Mr. Finta, websites like these, where scammers sell photos of unsuspecting young women, are Chinese websites, right?
I believe that is true, sir, and it is common among the transnational organized crime groups to sell all kinds of information back and forth between different groups for different levels of exploitation.
And the CCP could, with a flip of a switch, take these down, right?
I don't know the technical side behind that, sir, but I think they have great capacity to impact that.
So the CCP could stop this, but they are not. And through their inaction, they're complicit in the bankruptcy of countless older Americans, right?
I don't disagree with that, sir.
Now I'd like to turn to my last topic. So I want to turn your attention to a surprise guest witness, Daisy, who I mentioned in the opening. I had the chance to actually video chat with her yesterday, and she even gave me a compliment. Can you play the video? Yes. Can you see me now?
Yeah, hi. Wow.
Hi, Daisy. How are you doing?
I'm good. The stars so handsome.
Well, it's nice to talk to you. As you can see, Daisy is pretty convincing and engaging, likely enabled by AI, live face filters, or deep fakes. The conversation quickly switched to investment. I had a question for her. I said, how much do you want me to invest in gold?
Can start with a small amount, right? You can just start with $100 or $500. That is up to you. You know what I mean?
This is how people in scam compounds prey on older adults. The scammers start small and gain the victim's trust, then butcher them for their life savings. I then asked plainly, is anyone making you do this? Her response was not pretty.
I asked you to do it, and no one asked me to do it. I just tried to do it by myself, to make a profit by myself. You got it?
We then gave up the jig, and I asked her if this was a scam, but it did not end well. Is it a scam compound?
Your mom is a scammer. Stop it.
They can help you there. They can help. Not happy. What's really unfortunate is that this person pretending to be Daisy could very well have been trafficked or kidnapped and forced to work at a scam compound with CCP connections. Mr. Finta, just like we need to protect older Americans from these scams, it seems like we also need to stop the human trafficking that enables these scams, right?
I couldn't agree more. And honestly, if we worked together as a country and we put all those resources in one basket, we'd have a lot more effect at making that happen.
Right. It's like we got to protect our folks, our seniors, but at the same time, if we could stop the flow of this human trafficking, the people who are working at these scam factories, we would also be effectively shutting down the scams. So I call on our committees to jointly work on these two issues together and for all Americans to be vigilant of these scams as well. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative LaHood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my Senate colleagues for welcoming us. I actually just came over here because I wanted to try the U.S. Senate water. So we appreciate you having us here as House members. Thanks to our witnesses for your testimony here today on this very important topic. I'll just state at the outset here, America's global innovation leadership matters, and Chinese leaders recognize that foreign know-how and capital are fundamental to their malign activities to unfairly bolster China's own domestic technological innovation, including AI, robotics, quantum, and semiconductors. We've talked a lot in this committee, the Select Committee on China. China has a plan to replace the United States, and they're working at it every single day. They want to beat us technologically, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. And the sooner we wake up to that, the better. And as we think, unlike our democracy, the CCP can dictate and arbitrarily direct industrial policy as it relates to funding towards technologies they believe are most important. We've seen that with CCP subsidies and investment in research rising 6 times faster than the United States. The CCP plays by a different set of rules and standards than the rest of the world and has a track record of exploiting U.S. investments and intellectual property. We've heard a lot about that on our committee, in our committee hearings, to develop Chinese domestic military and intelligence capabilities that undermine U.S. national security. New restrictions on access to U.S. capital and expertise could hinder the CCP's ability to innovate new technology. And we have a number of bills in the House right now that we're looking at. The U.S. must continue to create new tools to curb U.S. investment in CCP high-tech sectors and prevent U.S. capital from being used to embolden the CCP's military. I'll start with you, Mr. O'Leary. We've heard from a couple of our members today on the CCP's use of golden shares as a vehicle, but it also seems to be a vehicle for party control inside private companies. From your vantage point, are there any private companies in China that have the ability to refuse a request from the CCP over business decisions under this structure?
I'm sure they have the right to do that, and then you don't hear from them anymore. That's what I think happens. It's sort of a Jack Ma situation. I mean, you got to toe the party line. I think those are the rules. That's how it works. He was an extraordinarily successful entrepreneur, and then he disappeared for a while. And I think that's how it works. I think if you refuse to cooperate with the golden share participation, remember, they're selling down to 1% with effective super rights with that 1%. And, you know, I'm not sure you can go to your counsel in China and say, look, I'd like to object for this and litigate this in court. In fact, I'm sure you can't do that. That's what you would do here. If the government said to me, you're going to sell, we're going to sell our complete holdings and we're going to keep 1%, and we're going to tell you what to do every day in one of my public companies, I'd say, sure, let's go to court. That's why people invest here, because there is an appellate system on a check and balance of crazy ideas like that. So my answer would be, there's no difference in China between a public company or a private one. There's just a golden share. That's it.
Thank you for that. Mr. Iacovella, as I mentioned, while the United States still funds more basic research than China does, China investment is rising 6 times faster and is expected to overtake the U.S. in spending within the decade. How can we as policymakers support the development and fostering of innovation and bolster America's leadership position in this international competition?
Well, I think one of the first things we can do is prohibit American money from continuing to fund Chinese companies and their innovation and their military rise. I think that's what my big concern is, and why I tried to articulate in the testimony, is that we have companies on the commerce list, on the DOD list, on the human rights list. These companies should not have access to our capital markets. They should not have access to anybody to be able to do business in this country. But for some reason, they continue to be able to take American investor money and fund their rise. And it's like a whack-a-mole scene where we put one on an index list, they create a subsidiary, and then that subsidiary starts to get money in our capital markets. And that's why whatever Congress does, it has to be very crystal clear on the prohibition.
Thank you for that. I yield back, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today. I'm John Husted. I'm Senator from Ohio, and I want to talk a little bit about AI. And I know that Senator Rosen and I have a bill that would prohibit DeepSeek from being on any federal devices. But I have, grown concern about how, we talk about the scams with seniors, and certainly foreign adversaries like China are exploiting our freedoms. We allow these technologies to freely flow inside of America while they prohibit those same kinds of technologies from being available to their population. And Mr. O'Leary, I'll just I know you have a lot of experience in looking at these investments in China and abroad. Do you have any thoughts on AI, particularly DeepSeek or anything in that space, how our freedoms, how Chinese government and Chinese businesses are perhaps exploiting our freedoms, and what threats AI pose in that space, particularly for our seniors and scams that could be perpetrated in America?
Yeah, this is a good point. You know, this issue around AI competition, it's my belief that the country that advances AI the fastest and with the most capacity is the safest from a defense point of view. I don't care where warfare goes in terms of technology, it's going to be driven by AI. Predictive outcomes in a war scenario. If I were China, I would want to be the most advanced and as fast as I could in AI just to prepare for warfare in the future. I mean, that's what we should be really concerning ourselves with. Do we have the most advanced AI? You can see the effects of AI. We talked about fraud. You can see the propaganda as of 48 hours on TikTok right now, incredibly, remarkably generated images of overweight Americans at sewing machines. That's all AI driven. The challenge we have, it's almost worth its own investigation, is the country with the most power wins AI, because you have to build giga-sized data centers. Right now in America, we have a demand for 45 gigs. 5 gigs are under construction. What holds us back in North America, Mexico and Canada included, is permits and power. If you go to any authority here in any state and ask for a gig of power, you can't get it. It's just not available. So our grid is maxed out. And China has solved this problem with coal-powered electrical plants that are generating a tremendous amount of electricity. They don't have a problem with permitting. The government finds the land, they build the facilities, and they power it with over 1.4 gig of power. And one of the reasons they were able to advance DeepSeek so quickly was they got the power to do it. And you've heard lots of warnings about this, but AI, it should be earmarked as #1 issue for defense. That's what I think it is. In every way, including propaganda and everything else. But if we don't have the best AI, we won't be winning militarily in the future.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And if you study the history of the world, the nations that are the most military and economically dominant are the nations that are the most innovative. And new technologies from the beginning of time have advanced as military weapons that allowed for nations to conquer or be conquered. It certainly creates that same opportunity from an economic point of view, because look, militaries are built through the revenue and the growth of a nation's economy.
And the tech.
And the tech. And the tech is financed from that economic dominance. So economic dominance begets military dominance. Military dominance traditionally has been helpful at economic dominance and conquest and setting the rules of the game for global competition. The other two gentlemen who are with us today, you have any thoughts on those particular issues?
I think we could go back to exactly what Kevin was talking about in the beginning and what I've tried to talk about, which is the playing field is not equal. Our companies are playing on an unlevel playing field to access the capital. Over there, it's going into China, and it may never come back. Xi makes one decision, and then that's all gone. And we don't know how deep and how far the investment ecosystem is in private equity, in pensions, it's in mutual funds. Any of these that hold Chinese companies can go to zero tomorrow if Xi decides to do so. And I think that's what the scariest thing is from my perspective.
Great. I'm out of time, but I will say to this point, these technologies in a free society that are yielded by our adversaries and people within those nations who will not police the rule of law can be weaponized against our citizens, and in this particular case, our elderly citizens in this nation. And we got to wake up to it, and I appreciate your thoughts. Chair recognizes Representative Castor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. And I want to apologize if I've been kind of squirming in my seat. I'm just like our neighbors and small businesses across America are suffering whiplash right now because of the economic chaos that has been inflicted upon us by the White House and the President over the past few weeks regarding import taxes and just the sheer chaos of not knowing what is coming next. And to the subject of this hearing, that kind of chaos empowers the Chinese Communist Party. That emboldens them to continue their malign economic abuse of our seniors in this country, but our businesses, our allies, our friends. The Chinese Communist Party, they know that these fraudsters and sophisticated scammers target older Americans to steal their hard-earned cash. Is especially poignant in a state like Florida, where 20% of the population over 65. In the latest report to Congress regarding the protection of older adults, the Federal Trade Commission stated that older adults reported losing more than $1.9 billion to fraud in 2023. That's just the cost of the reported cases. The vast majority of frauds are not even reported. I heard you, Mr. Finta, talk about your mother, your parents. I hear these same stories from my mother and her friends. They just feel like they're over the barrel, that they are being preyed upon. They're not exactly sure what's coming at them next. They want help. The problem is that the White House now not just causing this economic turmoil and uncertainty, they're also going after the cops on the beat. Particularly the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is one of our premier consumer protection agencies. It has a critical role in fighting fraud. And it gets more complex all the time. So to divert resources from a Federal Trade Commission that has grown expertise over time to tackle these kind of abuses, it just doesn't make any sense. So here's a glaring, flashing warning light right now, not just the economic turmoil caused by the president, but what he is doing and the fact that Republicans in Congress are not standing up to keep the cops on the beat at the Federal Trade Commission. We're talking about their investigators, their enforcers, and the president even went so far as to attempt to fire commissioners from just the Democratic commissioners of the FTC. Now, here's the problem. Congress, in a bipartisan way, a few years ago, established the FTC as an independent, bipartisan enforcement agency. They have a long history of defending consumers. So when you take the cops off the beat and then you say, well, the FTC, we don't even want you to operate, then you're just hamstringing our own selves, our ability to counter the CCP and all of their malign efforts. So, Mr. Finta, you, in your testimony, you said, and your exchange with Senator Gillibrand, you said, we need to double down. We need to recommit through the Department of Justice. And wouldn't that include the Federal Trade Commission, too, where we have experts that are ready to go on task and work to counter the Chinese Communist Party and their fraudsters?
I appreciate the question, and I think the Federal Trade Commission would be an essential partner in this whole of society approach, this task force. I will say that historically, with each agency, regardless of cutbacks and changes in different administrations, working independently, we continue to lose. The problem keeps getting worse year after year after year. I think probably the bigger issue is establishing a working relationship that includes the FTC, the other law enforcement agencies in the United States, and the private sector to share the appropriate amount of data to have effect, which hasn't really been the case at an effective or impactful level in the past.
I agree with you, and I salute you. Thank you to our witnesses for being here and helping us to call out these scammers, these fraudsters, we all have to recommit and definitely not take the cops off the beat and create economic turmoil that pushes people into the arms of the Chinese Communist Party. I yield back.
Thank you. And I know it's probably a little bit confusing with folks running to vote and getting back here to hearing, and also who's chairing the committee. So I am proudly taking over chairing the committee. I am Senator Ashley Moody from the Tampa Bay area in Florida. Like my House colleague who also represents the Tampa Bay area, it's really great to have you here. I was an attorney general for a long time in Florida, and one of the things that I worked hard against were the scams that were affecting our senior citizens. It was one of my top priorities. There is no doubt that some of these are emanating from China. What I think has leaders from both parties struggle with, just like the American public struggles with, is understanding exactly how China and the Chinese government is operating to undermine American interests and, I believe, American strength and security. In fact, I just launched a bill and sponsored a bill, one of my first, which was sadly to not issue visas to Chinese nationals that want to come here on student visas, because over the past few years, we have had to arrest so many Chinese nationals here on visas that were sneaking onto our military bases, taking pictures. It's happened in the state of Florida. And it should be no surprise, if anybody was following it, that China passed laws just before the Biden administration. The first one was all Chinese nationals had to cooperate with matters of national security. And if you were a Chinese national, you had to participate with intelligence gathering or face consequences. So why we are issuing visas to Chinese nationals that are coming over here makes no sense. We're inviting agents of the CCP into our country when they are obligated by law to gather intelligence. That seems a simple step to me, something we can do as leaders. And what I've been fascinated with and appreciate is your testimony and your experience in identifying ways that China is acting, that is undermining America's interests. That's why I'm so grateful for President Trump and putting America first. And part of that lies in, and Mr. O'Leary, I should say, you are always saying, people think that they are investing in Chinese companies, and in fact, they are investing in ways that may be undermining our own interests or undermining their own interests. I know you've had experience with that. You've been gracious enough to give time and talk to other senators about that. And again, we've discovered things over time, and I'll go back to, we caught them setting up police stations in our own country, right? We caught them stealing intellectual property from our universities and setting up institutes within our universities. I mean, there are ways that we have tried to reveal these very directed, specific targeting of undermining American interests. And so I'll turn my first question to Mr. O'Leary. You have discussed how American investors essentially own nothing in China and how the CCP government maintains an ultimate veto over its companies. In your view, what efforts can we do to convince our colleagues and the American people that the government of China cannot be trusted as long as we're willing to tolerate the totalitarian regime in Beijing?
Well, step one, which I think is going to be the easiest path of least resistance, is to simply enforce existing laws, particularly in capital markets, where those of us that are compliant have to compete with entities that are not. And so if you have a golden share, or if you haven't produced GAAP statements that are transparent over the last 24 months, you're going to get delisted. And that's going to be billions of dollars getting evaporated off our exchanges. And that, I think, is a wake-up call to China, which really, if you think about it, wants to become the 8th member of the G7, so the G8. They want to play with the big boys. They're going to have to play by the rules. Everything stems from capital. You can't build an economy all on your own. You have to get access to capital. And we have provided an amazing platform for China to tap into the world's greatest economy from a consumer basis where they can sell their products, and also the rule of law to raise capital. And that has not been fair. It's not been a level playing field. just to be sure, I actually want to invest in China, and I want to compete in China, and I want to be able to sell products to Chinese consumers. I've got nothing against Chinese consumers. I feel that American technology and innovation can compete anywhere, and I just want to compete on a level playing field. We need to impose a level playing field, and the only way to do that, after watching for 20 years and multiple administrations, not only here domestically but internationally, nobody has called them to the rug. Nobody has said, okay, you're not complying, and all they've been taught from us is there's no consequence. You can do whatever the hell you want and you don't pay the price. That is what our message has been for 25 years. And I'm only asking as one voice, when is this going to change? I mean, when? Because if it doesn't change now, they're going to continue to take advantage of us in every way possible, including IP theft, which I bet you, and this is a personal opinion, you give me any Chinese technology that's advanced and you reverse engineer it, I'll show you American code from some decade, as many 40 years ago. I swear to you, I believe that. And we never did anything about it then, and we're not doing anything about it now. We're here to say it's got to stop. We're the guys in the front line. We're dealing with this. You've heard my colleagues talk about this. It's just not fair. And I'm just asking for you to impose the existing laws. If you do that, believe me, those boys are coming over here on an airplane. That's what's going to happen. You can't cut off people from the United States market, the largest on earth, and capital markets without a consequence.
Well, we appreciate you certainly being here and being a part of this process where we are calling it out. And conducting a Senate hearing, a joint House and Senate hearing is certainly part of that. And I want to commend our chairman of this committee, Senator Rick Scott, who has really used this committee to tackle some of our most challenging issues, not only confronting the threats from China, from the opioid crisis, to how do we confront the most pressing issues facing our seniors. I want to thank you, Chairman, and I also want to thank you for coming back so that I can pass the gavel right back to you. Appreciate it, Mr. O'Leary.
Thank you, Senator Moody. Yeah, we've got a lot of votes this afternoon, so I have to go back and forth for votes. Senator Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Finta, I wanted to start with you. As I was preparing for this hearing, I was trying to get a sense of just the magnitude of the problem that we face, and I think every single one of us realizes that we don't know the full extent and scope of what we're dealing with. And I thought, in fact, your testimony, approached this with a sense of humility. You said, I believe only 10 to 15% of elder fraud victims ever report the crimes against them. I guess I just wanted to start based off of your experience. Are there any best practices that you have seen, or are there certain types of steps that we should be taking to make it easier for the reporting, or try to have a better handle, try to better encourage people to come forward, but also making sure that we know what we're actually dealing with?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. It's a great opportunity to talk about what should be as opposed to what is right now. And unfortunately, right now in the United States, the reporting is remarkably low. One of the other kind of consequences of the crime itself is that a lot of our seniors would prefer to report to their local police departments. But when you walk into a police department in the United States right now and you say, hey, my mom or my dad or myself was the victim of a pop-up ad on the internet where I went to a digital currency ATM and sent money overseas. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the time, what you're going to immediately get is, hey, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. Yeah. You should call the FBI, or you should file a claim with IC3. When you call the FBI as an individual, or HSI, or you file a claim with the Internet Crime Complaint Center, you're viewed essentially as an individual who lost $30,000, could be your life savings. Unfortunately, there's hundreds of thousands of those complaints. And without a real combined effort to aggregate, really analyze, and work the most pressing complaints, again, with our private industry partners, we're pushing a giant rock uphill as law enforcement. And it does not encourage people to do those reports when they don't see the effects of them. Right? When you file a complaint and that complaint does not get worked, you're not called to testify at a sentencing hearing.
Yeah.
You don't get that.
Well, even, you said here in a follow-up sentence, even with this low percentage, the volume of complaints is still far too large to investigate under current circumstances. As you were saying, I guess I wanted to just ask, are we thinking about it in the right model here? I was about to ask you, how much more do we have to surge resources towards this? But, this is kind of like a Sisyphean effort, though, in terms of just, constantly feeling like we're never actually going to scratch what is actually there. I guess I wanted to ask you, in terms of what you experienced, are we successful in addressing some of the complaints that we had? Or is that just not the right direction in terms of being able to put our resources towards?
No, and I believe with any large problem, there has to be multiple approaches to combat it. This is just one of them in terms of actual investigation and enforcement. I do believe that if we constructed, because I did have great success, at least locally, on the Elder Justice Task Force in San Diego County with 13 police departments all participating, with private industry participating almost in real time. It is effective as a model if you proliferate that across the country. So the combined results of 50, 100 EJTFs around the country would start to have a disincentive effect on those groups overseas and the people here facilitating those crimes.
I see. So you're saying if you can replicate that type of structure and have it scaled across our country, but still would need to be some type of coordinating body, is that something that you see be able to rest within the FBI, or is that something at federal government level to try to coordinate across?
Well, that's a good question, and that's outside of my my lane in terms of speaking for other agencies. But I do think, again, with, for example, National Elder Fraud Coordination Center, to aggregate the data from U.S. companies who do have amazing resources to support those types of investigations would be a game changer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm out of time, so I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Senator Justice.
Well, first of all, thank you for all three of you coming and your testimony. I didn't get the chance to hear it, and so, we've been running back and forth doing all these votes and everything. But I've got to just tell you just this. For one of you, Kevin, we've become real friends, and what an incredible man this man is. I've had him in my office in Charleston, West Virginia, in the governor's office, and I had the opportunity to be the governor of the state of West Virginia for 8 years. And I can tell you that I can speak very frankly and say, I don't know that anybody's been in that office that's been more creditable than this man. And so I appreciate our friendship. He's done every single thing that he said he would do, even to the point in time when he called West Virginia a winner state. And I would say just this: if West Virginia is a winner state, I love the contest of ball games and everything. But absolutely, we can't possibly say we're winning. We're absolutely winning when it comes to China. I don't see how anybody can say that and say that in a fair way. Now, I can honestly say just this too. One of his companies, Prime 6, and I hope I'm not stepping out of my bounds and everything, but he came and in November of last year, we were sitting, in a location in Fairmont, West Virginia, and he said, we're going to make this a go, and we're going to make it a go now. And I think they're scheduled for June, from November to June, and absolutely they're pulling it off. And so, like I said, as far as credibility, he has not only my vote, but many in the great state of West Virginia. So with all that being said, Kevin, as your friend, I would just ask just this, because we've got a lot of elderly people in West Virginia, and those retirees are absolutely being bombarded in a lot of ways. You know, I thank you for bringing awareness, all three of you, awareness to a real problem in this great country that we know about, but we don't seem to do anything about it. You know, Kevin just a minute ago said just that. We know about it. For God's sakes, a living, this can't be that hard. You know, we know about it, and we don't do anything about it. Well, I really don't get it. You know, like I said, I'm a new kid on the block here, but I'm a kid that abounds in common sense and logic and goodness and truth. And so I've got just one question, and it's just an echo of the same question, but it just basically says this. It says, the lack of transparency, financial representation, ties to human rights violations, and scams are just many of the reasons why investing in Chinese companies has become a real and unique threat. What can individuals in West Virginia, the residents of our great state, do to help protect themselves and their retirements and their pensions and from these financial threats? And so please, Kevin, if you would, and you've probably already given us a whole bunch of advice already, but I didn't have the liberty to be able to be here to hear it, but please tell us more wisdom.
Well, I just feel that if the initiative and the incentive from these hearings and with other members is to enforce existing laws as they stand, we will end up in a much better place in terms of our relationship with China, because they are a large economy, we are larger, and there's a chance to work all this out. I might add that while we've been sitting here, my phone's been lighting up. The market's up 3,000 points, because what's occurring here is the tariff situation with the rest of the world, although chaotic, is getting organized. It seems that way. 69 countries coming to the table, and maybe we end up with zero tariffs. I don't know. China is not the same. It's not the same. We have to resolve the issues we have been talking about here today as part of the negotiation. I don't care if we get to 400% tariffs on China. The only thing I care about is getting them to the table to resolve these issues, to make it safe for every American to invest there or do business with them, including in West Virginia. And you know, this is changing by the hour, but now I'm starting to see what's happening, and so is the market too. The world is one thing, China is completely different. Tariffs are being used to get them to the table to level the playing field finally, and all of us that are involved in dealing with this and competing with it applaud it. I can assure you, I'm the voice of millions on this that have been doing business there. And something else West Virginia can do that I think is going to be coming into the highlight pretty soon as we get into this AI competition with China. There are very few states or locations in America or Mexico or Canada that have as much stranded natural gas as West Virginia has. And that's pure gold for AI. Now, I can speak to you as, you know, in working with your government, you move permits quickly for that Prime 6 plant you spoke of, and that's why it's happening so fast. Do the same thing in AI development. Allow companies to come there, tap the stranded gas, bring in the turbines, build the facilities, and light up AI. You can't do that right now in Virginia because of the rules and regulations. We're not allowing gas turbines to work in conjunction with diesel backup generation. And so the sites in West Virginia become prime real estate now for AI. You will transform your state's economy by embracing energy, because we don't have enough in America. And you have senators there, and there's lots of other people in your government in West Virginia that understand this opportunity is huge. It's absolutely huge. Demand is insatiable. You got to tap that and move at the same speed you did, and I'm just one investor in West Virginia. It was a winner state because you got stuff done, and everybody has to hear that message.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, and thank all of you. Thank all of you for being here today.
So, Mr. O'Leary, what if there was a company called WeatherTech? You know, and they produce really nice mats for their car.
I have them in my F-150.
And they woke up one day and they looked on Alibaba and they saw that their products were being sold on Alibaba. And they looked at their shipping, and they never had done any business with Alibaba. And they looked just like the mats that they produced in Illinois, and they even had their name on it, right? What could they do to stop this theft of their product? And they got nothing for it. What would be their recourse right now?
There is nothing they can do. You have just told the story of 1 million small businesses in America over the last 20 years. They innovate, they create, they're entrepreneurs, they prove their product in the American consumer market at around 5 million in sales. They're knocked off. By whom? China. Very often, the same plants that ran the molds under a relationship they had with the company. A lot of companies went to China 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and put their molds there. And during the day, the company would run the WeatherTech mat, in this example, here theoretically. And then at night, they'd run the knockoff mat. And they would bring it into the market, let me guess, 30% off retail of WeatherTech. And I've seen this happen countless times. And in some cases where the company's very small, they go out of business. And nobody hears that tree falling in the forest. It happens thousands of times. There's such an immense opportunity here to enforce existing laws. But really, at the end of the day, the reason that behemoth company couldn't do anything about it, they have no access to the Chinese courts. They can't resolve the complaint through litigation, as we do here. So my recommendation is, look, if you're a Chinese company and you want to use our courts to litigate your complaint, sorry, not until you open yours. We'd love to work with you, but unless it's a reciprocal complaint, the whole idea of today's conversation was just to get to a reciprocal playing field, an even playing field. American companies have always been very competitive anywhere on earth when given a chance on a transparent and competitive playing field. That's not the case in China. I mean, we're all saying the same thing here. It's got to get fixed. And finally, here we are with tariffs being the excuse. But now I think she has to come to the table. And I hope it happens. And I'd like to see tomorrow morning 400% tariffs.
So let's say there's the same company called WeatherTech, and they know Alibaba is selling in the United States of America to American consumers. They wouldn't be able to get money out of Alibaba right here?
No, they can try. Sometimes it's a big enough case, they will take it down. Amazon, it's much better if you can prove that you own the IP. And,
But they couldn't get any damages out of Alibaba,
I doubt
right?
it. I have never heard of a case resolved to the satisfaction of the company that's making the complaint, ever. Now, there may be a case I don't know of, but the WTO is supposed to provide this platform. You find me 1 year since 2020 where there haven't been a plethora of complaints exactly like the one you've just detailed, and there's been no consequences. None. Zero. And the Chinese economy has done very, very well on the back of stolen IP and ripping tech off and using products at much lower price points that they've made themselves based on American IP. Look, it's got to stop. I mean, and I'm sure most Chinese people would love to compete. I mean, there's great Chinese entrepreneurs. They don't need to cheat and steal. They can't. We just need a level playing field. I would love to see this resolved, and I hope it happens. But I say, and what I've learned and what I've seen in my long career is China understands only one thing: the stick. Give them the stick. They respond to the stick.
Hopefully today we'll confirm a new chairman to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So what would you ask him to do? What do you think his responsibility is? Because, so if I used to take companies public, and when I took them public, I had to have current financial statements. I had to disclose all the material information, right? And the SEC enforced it, right? I had to do it with when I took things public and I sold securities, and I had to do it with my 10 Qs and 10 Ks every quarter and every year. So what should he do right now? He'll probably be sworn into office tomorrow. What should he do?
I assume you're referring to Paul Atkins.
Right.
He should go right back to the files and execute the mandate the law has given him. There must be dozens of companies that are offside right now in compliance on GAAP. Dozens. They should have been delisted 2 years ago. They're still trading, they're still raising capital, they're still competing with people like me for that money, and they're not compliant with GAAP. There is no way on earth I could do that. I would never have that opportunity, and yet they do. All I want from him, and I think you'll hear a lot of people saying the same thing, is you have this mandate, now enforce it.
Yeah. What about, these, Wall Street firms that say, look, American investors, they want to invest in these companies, and if we don't allow them to invest in an American stock exchange, through an American stock exchange, they'll just go some other place. What would your response be to that?
What's going to happen when this law starts to be enforced is, and this is the case in almost every regulator, the 7 big regulators on earth, they speak with the SEC practically weekly. Everybody complies with the law that's actually implemented and enforced in America in one way or another. They don't want to be offside with the world's largest capital market. It's not that they like us. They want access to the largest capital market. The reason the ADGM in Abu Dhabi doesn't want to get involved with companies that are not compliant with the SEC or whatever body it is in the US is because they want access to the world's largest and most liquid capital market, and they don't want to ever be offside. It's the strength of America and the access to the market and the largest consumers market that gives it its strength, and it hasn't used it. And this administration finally, and a lot of people don't like the style of the president, I get it. And listen, with Trump, the way I look at it is I don't focus on the noise, I focus on the signal. What I'm hearing is enough. And we're going to enforce the laws. And that's probably a good outcome for everybody. Although, watching the market go up and down 3,000 points a day is people gnash their teeth. But if that's the price, it's worth it.
Chris, this is just a theoretical issue. These Chinese companies, we don't really know what their financial statements are, but it's never really a problem. No one ever loses money. Has that ever happened, or is it just a theoretical problem?
No, it's happened. There's been multiple companies. There was a pharmaceutical company named Kang Mei where one day it was a going concern, and the next day it had a $15 billion hole in its balance sheet, and that was because the CCP decided it was no longer a useful concern for it. And that was part of some of the index funds. That's one of the reasons why we started to get involved in this. And to add to what Kevin said on your previous question, they can go overseas if they'd like to, but there's no rule of law in Hong Kong. There's no rule of law in mainland China that stands up to our rule of law. And there's also something called a fiduciary duty, which requires you to do diligence, to investigate. You have an obligation to your shareholders to take into account reputational risks, geopolitical risks, the fact that they might just take over the whole board from a Monday to a Tuesday, or that they might impose capital controls, which basically absorb all of the retained earnings at that company. That's too big of a risk to take as a fiduciary. So I think that's a false argument. I've heard it multiple times, and that's how I would push back on it.
So if an American investor, let's say 65-year-old woman, invested in a mutual fund, and they invested in a Chinese stock, and they lied, and unfortunately it went to zero, the mutual fund would not take the money out of it wouldn't take the money out of that poor lady's fault, would they? They would eat that loss themselves, wouldn't they?
Well, no, that fund would bring down the overall return.
You mean the lady would lose money, even though the mutual fund allowed, they're the ones who bought the stock that didn't comply with GAAP?
That's right. That's why the passive index loophole is such a problem, because none of those companies comply with any of our laws. and yet American money goes straight into them,
Well,
particularly
then would
with
the exchange that stock's traded on, would they take the responsibility so the lady wouldn't lose money?
So if it was in the United States here, I think there could be some recourse against not only the underwriters who brought that stock into our exchange.
Has that happened?
No, it hasn't.
So the underwriter who sold the stock of a company that didn't comply with GAAP has no liability in the United States.
That's not been tested yet.
So you
With
think
the Chinese
what do you
company.
think the law is?
With an American company, that has been tested multiple times, and the underwriter also is liable generally. Now, the exchanges are self-regulatory organizations, which means they have legal authority to adjust their standards, and they're supposed to protect the integrity of their marketplace. And if they have companies trading on their market that aren't complying with U.S. laws, then they do have some sort of a regulatory obligation to remove them to protect the integrity of the market and the investors who trade on it. To date, they haven't done that.
So the underwriter has had no liability, the exchange has no liability, and the mutual fund has no liability. So all the money, so if they all did this, then the only person that's holding the bag is the 65-year-old lady that thought she was buying into a safe mutual fund.
That's correct, Senator.
Can I add something to that? Because I think you made a great point. Let's say Atkins delists a Chinese company and it immediately goes to London Exchange and says, oh, I just got delisted off the New York Stock Exchange and I want to get listed now here. I would think the regulator there would say, can you tell me why you got delisted? Oh, we broke the law in the US. Oh, please, come and list here. I mean, obviously, if you're a mutual fund manager with a mandate, you're not going to want to touch that company. Once they get tainted by breaking US securities laws, that's a tattoo forever on that board. They're not going to escape it in any market on earth. It's going to make their shares worth 60% off retail. So I'm not worried about anybody moving, and I suggest my colleagues 100% right. Once they get delisted for breaking the law, they are radioactive waste in financial services.
So, Mr. Finta, so if you were the new FBI director, all right, I'll give you just something one Florida sheriff said to me. They said, we probably don't really need a whole bunch of help on any more bank robberies like we probably needed in the 30s. What we really need is help on these international scams because we don't have any ability to deal with these international scams. What would your recommendation to the FBI be?
Sir, I would recommend a reshuffling of resources to include treating these types of scams and frauds as transnational organized crime. At the moment, to some degree, depending where you are, but they're generally looked at as a white-collar crime. The type of investigation that one conducts on white-collar crime as opposed to transnational organized crime tend to differ. Also, transnational organized crime has the ability to rope in agencies all across the United States to assist, which is what you need. When you have money mules in 14 different states, victims in 50 states, actual organizers in a dozen different states, you need a team to work those types of cases. I would also step up the amount of interaction on a real-time basis with America's companies, with our private sector, so that the access to that data, where the evidence lies, happens faster to increase the amount of accomplishment in a shorter period of time. We could do more cases with less.
So things like bank robberies or other issues that the FBI historically had been involved in that probably local law enforcement has the ability to do on their own. There's probably other areas. If they actually said, we're not going to focus on that, but we're going to focus on these international scams, would the FBI have the resources to put a lot of smart talent against these international scams?
The FBI hires pretty well, sir. I think they have a lot of good, smart people that can do this. I will say, I'm not going to speak for the FBI and what their resources are right now. Just like just like we did with the healthcare fraud task forces in the past, I think it would be appropriate for the Congress, for the Senate, to actually staff those with budgets, with requirements, to say, hey, listen, if we're going to ask you to do this, we're going to give you the resources to do it. But if we did, as a country, we could accomplish a lot of good.
So Kevin and Chris, so let's say I have a new company and I feel really good about it and I want to take it public, right? So why wouldn't I just pick, there's no real reason. I could pick any exchange in the world, right? Wouldn't be, what if would I have any discount if I said, I'm not going to do it here, I'm going to go and do it on the Indian Stock Exchange or the Hong Kong Stock Exchange or the Shanghai, Stock Exchange? Is there any reason why I will get more money and my trading will be clearly more liquid if I pick an American exchange? Is there any reason to have it? Is there any discount? Any reason not to do it?
Every company on earth, pretty well every company on earth, if given the option, would either list on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, period. And the reason they would do that is the amount of capital that is interested in investing in a company that's gone through the rigorous compliance and transparency with the regulatory laws here on issuing a prospectus, and the fact that they could get indexed into the billions and trillions of dollars that are actually invested in indexes where their company might be included. The largest index on earth is the S&P 500. It's the gold standard. The United States remains the gold standard for public listings. There's very few exchanges that can compete. A company, most of the time, if they believe they're compliant, will always see the availability of an NYSE or NASDAQ listing first. Very often they'll try London next. But it's every institutional investor on earth, in one way or another, puts almost half their capital into one of those two exchanges. They are the largest on earth, and they're going to remain that way while the rule of law is transparent, and we have an appellate system, and we actually enforce these laws, because the American economy is actually based on confidence. That's what it is. And the belief that it is the most transparent legal system on earth. Now, we've gone through a lot of issues around it, but we've had these issues before. Why is it even adversaries want to invest their capital here? You have to ask yourself that. It's trust. It's it. So the answer is, more people, even adversaries, trust the United States than any other country on earth, and the way you can tell is how they vote their dollars. It all comes here. And anything that, by not enforcing laws, we actually breach that trust. We should be, when Atkins comes in here, he is the steward of these laws. His mandate is to enforce them, to show the world that he and his mandate and the country and the system and the exchanges can be trusted. Anybody that did not enforce those laws was hurting the American brand. That's what they were doing. And that's got to get fixed. You don't want to hurt the mothership, the American dream, the American brand, that it transcends partisan politics or any generation. It has to be maintained. And the way you do that is you enforce these laws. So I'm very hopeful that you're right, that we're going to see a lot of these delistings, and I'm looking forward to it. And they can do the right thing and do like I have to, comply. Pay for that compliance. Hire a firm. Pay the millions it costs to stay listed. And I'm happy they'll do that, because I'm happy to compete with them.
Hi. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
I just want to thank the three of you for your excellent testimony. This was a superb hearing, and each one of you contributed a great deal of substance and ideas to the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, to work hopefully on a bipartisan basis to write some legislation to correct some of these challenges and problems. Senator Scott and I are chairman of and ranking on the Senate Aging Committee. The House members were the special committee on China, so that was the area of differences in our questions. But I really appreciate the depth of knowledge that each of you have, and you've given us great ways that we can work together to protect not only the American dream, but protect our parents and our grandparents to make sure they are not continually targeted and absolutely scammed out of their hard-earned dollars and their retirement savings. So thank you. I think that your recommendations, Mr. Finta, with regard to resources, with regard to collaboration with local law enforcement, with regard to creating specialized commissions to do this work is very wise and thoughtful. Mr. Iacovella, I really appreciated your recommendations with regard to how we keep security firms safe, how we keep investments by our states to be protected and good investments. I think your insights in that is extraordinarily helpful. And I think, Mr. O'Leary, your insights with regard to how we incorporate, how we have laws that protect U.S.-based companies, how we allow for U.S.-based companies to compete worldwide is very important. And I couldn't agree with you more that the stability of U.S. markets and the fact that people respect our law enforcement and the oversight and accountability that we can provide in this jurisdiction is worth everything. It's why people want to do business in the United States. So thank you all for being such important leaders, and I appreciate all the contributions you made to us and to this committee.
Thank you, Ranking Member. We've got a few House members coming back, but I've got another question. I just want to. So, Mr. O'Leary, what if there's a company called ByteDance that owned a subsidiary called TikTok. And the U.S. government made the decision, Congress made the decision that they shouldn't do business in our country because it was all Chinese propaganda, right? And they were required to sell. Now, if that happened, it would be, whatever the free market would be, they would sell at some price, whatever that price is, right? But what if the government of China had the right to say, no, you can't sell it? And so what happens, what's the spread? Now, what would be the spread probably in a value of something like that if you say, you can't do business, you got to shut down in America for the parent company, for TikTok, or you can go sell to the highest bidder. What would be a range, and would that be a material disclosure that was not made by the underwriters, required by the SEC, enforced by an exchange?
Yeah. TikTok is the most unique situation in American corporate history because I don't recall ever a company having a law written specifically because of the way it operates. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, and I don't think in history we've had anything like this. Not only did Congress pass a law specific to it, but the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in further definition and resolution about exactly what was intended by that law. However, it has 7 million American businesses operating on it, generating somewhere between 15 and 17 billion of revenue. And in a commercial environment, that's of interest to many investors, including me and others. And this is the first time I've ever seen a private equity deal, basically, where the actual deal terms are written into a law from Congress and the Supreme Court. I think that's absolutely unique. And now everybody's trying to interpret what these laws are to actually do this deal. We've now given a new 75-day period. I doubt there'll be another one, but I think there will be a deal done according to the law because there's value there and markets clear at whatever price it has to be. I've heard estimates of as low as 20 billion without the algorithm, as high as 40 with it. So who knows? Apparently, it's pretty clear to me today, after what I've listened to, that there'll be no algorithm in the deal. So,
but it's clearly a change in value, right?
Yeah, but you know, it'll be open price. The great thing about American capital markets, it's an open price discovery. Once the rules are placed in place and the investors are there, it's going to be negotiated based on whatever the clearing price is. And I think that would be an orderly way to get this thing done. I mean, I would prefer to see it, and I think it would be better for our markets to have the competition of this social media platform as long as it was operating in compliance with the law. But, I just have never seen anything like it, and I think for me, it's a legacy deal of a lifetime. It's just, if I'm in any way part of the solution, I'll be very proud, because here's how I feel about it. Those 7 million small businesses, they're all shark tankers. They're all second-generation American entrepreneurs, and we should protect them. We should make sure they survive this whole thing. It's not their fault. It's a shame to shut their businesses down, whether it's lipstick or clothing or whatever their product or service is. They're generating 1 to 3
It's a business,
billion.
and there's jobs,
Yeah.
and there's income.
That's it.
Congresswoman Hinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member as well for hosting this hearing over on your side. It's great to be over here. Over and over again, we continue to see Chinese companies systematically working around and continuing to take advantage of our laws to boost their growth while cutting us out of that process. They've been playing long games in this case, and too often we have been used and outmaneuvered. And as we've heard discussed today, many times American retirements and investments have flowed directly into these companies that strengthen the CCP's surveillance state, and in many cases are tied directly to forced labor violations. And that's why I recently reintroduced my bill, the Protecting American Industry and Labor from International Trade Crimes Act, which again empowers the Department of Justice, gives them the tools that they need to better be able to go after the bad guys, to detect, investigate, and prosecute these trade crimes, especially those that are frequently committed by the CCP, duty evasion, transshipment, forced labor violations, all the things that we've talked about today that disadvantage American workers and American businesses. So, Mr. O'Leary, my first question is for you today. How do CCP state subsidies and the dumping practices that they regularly utilize distort our markets, and how do they hurt our domestic manufacturers and producers, particularly in rural communities like mine in Iowa?
Well, the number one way there's damage done is not abiding by IP laws. That's probably the most long-term damage that has occurred, because it's small increments. Undoubtedly, if you go into your constituency and ask entrepreneurs over the last 40 years, you're going to find many companies that were knocked off in China and nothing was done about it. Some cases, they're bankrupt now as a result of. You got to think about something. An American company that spends, let's just use small numbers, $10 million in developing their product, and all the R&D, and they're going to have to amortize that over the life period of maybe 5 years on that product. And they put it on the market, and it immediately is a hit. And that would be defined by 5 million in annual sales. 5 million annual sales. Generally, you're going to make, 15 to 20%. You can support a family. You can grow the business. The minute that's seen by China, particularly if it's a weather tech or something so simple that can be knocked off, China did not participate in spending on the R&D. They didn't participate in developing the mold in some cases at all. They simply let the American company prove the market, and then they knocked it off. Right. If that happened stateside, within hours, I'd shut that down. It'd be easy. You could hire a local lawyer to do that. Mm-hmm. Can't do it in China. And so incrementally over the years, if there's one thing that we could change in this current narrative with China, would be to establish reciprocal IP laws and ways to litigate them and resolve complaints, which was intended in 2020 with the WTO agreement that they agreed to. And then there would be very punitive penalties if that was not abided by. And the best penalty is disallowing access to American capital markets.
And in my district, it was actually seed that they stole out of our cornfield. So you talk about spending billions of dollars on that IP and the R&D that goes into it. They were actually caught in an Iowa cornfield trying to steal the seed by the FBI, and the FBI pursued the investigation and tried to hold them accountable, actually arrested someone here in the United States. But we need more resources to be able to go after these people and actually enforce the trade laws that we do have on the books and, of course, protect these key industries from that unfair competition. And as you said, they just come in and they let us prove the market, they let us do all the work, and then
I've learned something the last 2 years you should know, and I speak to everybody in the room on this. They don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right. It's just how they do business.
That's not taught to them when they're young entrepreneurs, that there's anything wrong with stealing IP. because there's no consequence. And the only way, when a puppy is being, well, I don't even want to use that analogy, but you got to get the stick out.
Right. And this is about protecting Main Street small businesses and those innovators.
Right.
And so let's talk about the flow of capital going to these companies that are then turning around and being used against us. We've talked about the fact that they're able to trade on our exchanges. One example, Chinese LiDAR firm, Hesai, with links, of course, to the PLA, also on the DoD blacklist, but they are still trading publicly on the New York Exchange. I actually sent a letter to the NASDAQ last year asking them why are they allowed to continue to do this and remain listed. So I want to thank the chairman for his leadership in the Senate on this issue as well. We've tried to hold them accountable here and try and limit this. But given these very clear national security concerns, Mr. Iacovella, why are they still allowed to trade on our markets when we know so very clearly that these dollars are being used against us?
Well, hopefully a new sheriff in town 48 hours from now, they won't be. And I really hope that happens. I'll certainly do a shout out for him when he gets confirmed. I mean, this is somebody that should be enforcing the law because this is what maintains trust in the system. And I hope it happens. And there'll be very little consequence to public markets if it'll be a big wake-up call. Other exchanges will look at this, and I think there'll be a reaction in China domestically to get on board.
Mr. Iacovella, did you have anything you'd like to add there too, since we were talking about it?
No, I think Mr. Atkins will enforce the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act and the Accelerating Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, and we will have a real understanding of what the audits were supposed to be during the period when China was on lockdown and supposedly the PCAOB went over there and conducted audits into their auditing firms. There was a number of state secret privileges that prevented them from doing what they needed to do. And I think that Mr. Atkins isn't going to tolerate that. And hopefully, these companies that have been on for almost 2 years now that are non-compliant will start to be removed. And it's possible that the exchanges are seeing the wind shift and that they can take their own regulatory action and get these people off the exchanges because there's no reason for them to have access to our capital markets.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the indulgence. I yield back.
Congresswoman Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your patience while we were voting on the House floor. You know, over 73 million Americans across the country, predominantly seniors, depend on the Social Security Administration services. And yet, Social Security's website has been crashing, as you know, repeatedly over the past few weeks. Outages have lasted as long as a day in some cases. Other issues include confusing messages claiming that SSI recipients were currently not receiving payments. And all of this comes at a time when this administration is rolling out a new policy for identity proofing that will require millions of beneficiaries to set up an account online or show up in person, adding to the confusion. Now, we know why this is happening. In the past few weeks, Elon Musk and Doge have cut over 7,000 jobs from the Social Security Administration and are planning more, including a 50% cut to the agency's technology division responsible for its website and other online platforms. Last year, during the massive CrowdStrike outage, we saw an uptick in online scams to take advantage of the situation at hand. Our own Department of Homeland Security put out a bulletin warning of increased phishing and malicious activities. My concern is that Doge's reckless efforts to cut Social Security's technology division and roll out sweeping new policies that require seniors to go online are creating that same opening for scammers to take advantage of seniors and threaten their hard-earned benefits. Mr. Finta, would you agree that the instability in Social Security's website presence and online platforms is creating unnecessary uncertainty among our nation's seniors and others who depend on Social Security, and creating opportunity for China to both spread propaganda and for scammers to use this as an opportunity to exploit our elders?
Ma'am, that's not my area of expertise in terms of the markets and the confusion. If there's a law
Okay, but
enforcement...
you deal with preventing fraud and abuse among seniors.
Yes.
And right now, our seniors who are finding concerned about their Social Security benefits as a result of mixed messages they're getting online and proof of their identity.
Confusion does tend to support criminal activity, if that's what you're getting at, ma'am.
I think what I'm getting at is that if seniors are worried right now that they may not be getting their payments because they've actually gotten email messages that were incorrect, that if they have to make changes, they have to go in person or create online platforms. And in rural America, like where we live, you can't always get physically to a site. And so if you have this opportunity present itself to scammers, scammers are often looking to exploit situations like when people are scared or when there are changes in systems or even changes in updates to malware and whatnot. Do you think that this potentially could create an opportunity for them to exploit seniors given the confusion and actually the lack of staff? As was mentioned at the very beginning of the hearing, people won't even necessarily get someone answering the phone for hours if they call for help to Social Security. Is this a potential opportunity for scammers that we are seeing right now?
There's no doubt in my mind that given the opportunity, transnational organized crime groups would take advantage of that situation.
And if we had a situation where actually cutting tech staff that help to maintain these platforms, are we not creating a more vulnerable environment for scams on our seniors and our Social Security beneficiaries?
I don't disagree with that statement, ma'am.
Okay. I see that I've used quite a bit of my time. I did want to move on to reports that we saw in February from Wired that reported at least 8 scam compounds in the Myanmar-Thailand border region were using SpaceX Starlink terminals to connect to the internet and to carry out their operations. And between November 2024 and February 2025, there were over 40,000 logins to Starlink from known scam centers in the regions. I think Ranking Member Krishnamurthy was actually pointing some of those out. Mr. Finta, from your work protecting American seniors from fraud and other forms of financial exploitation, as well as your law enforcement background, how important is it that companies like SpaceX and Starlink and other companies providing similar technology develop robust processes to crack down and be an ally on trying to prevent these kind of abuses of their systems that target American elders and retirees?
Ma'am, it is my experience that these companies do have anti-fraud and vulnerable persons programs, and they do work towards those efforts. Individually, it is difficult for those companies, in my opinion, to have that kind of success as much as what we could if we had an all-of-government or an all-of-society approach towards supplementing those efforts. I'm not specifically familiar with the Starlink
Okay,
process.
well, it seems that there are actually a growing number of vendors that are openly advertising Starlink access as a solution for online scam operators. So we clearly need to work closer with them to make sure that we prevent and stop this fraud and abuse on our senior population. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for this unusual, unique, but very important bicameral hearing, I think, which underscores the threat that we face here. In February, President Trump issued the America First Investment Policy Memorandum that directs federal agencies to address outbound investment into China. Congress has been focused on this issue in multiple Congresses, and in this Congress, I've introduced the Fight China Act, formerly known as the COINS Act, to prevent outbound investments into Chinese military and surveillance companies. The Fight China Act also aligns with the President's memorandum by taking both an entity-based approach and a technology-based approach. This is important because sanctions do provide a multilateral effect, but not all civil-military fusion happens with just listed entities. We've seen quite a bit of venture capital and private equity flows into private, non-listed entities. And therefore, a technology focus is important. Mr. Iacovella, can you discuss why a law that prohibits U.S. outbound investment into both specific entities is needed, but also clearly defined technologies of national security concern? Why is that second piece so important?
Thank you for the question, and we supported your legislation, and we like the approach that you've taken because we always thought that you can turn up the dial on specific companies, but you needed to attack the entire sectors that are posing a national security threat. And there's more than just public capital, as you said, that's going over there. It's private capital, venture capital, private equity and public capital that's going over there. But what's even more of an issue is that you have companies that are subsidiaries of subsidiaries of subsidiaries, and maybe the parents on one of the DoD lists or the entity list, and you can't get to them unless you prohibit the sectoral investment in those Chinese companies. And so I appreciate your approach. I think you've threaded the needle there, and we strongly support it.
We want to give the private sector the red light, green light approach, but we think we can get at this problem and accomplish that by clearly defining the technologies of concern. Mr. O'Leary, the Fight China Act, this bill that I've introduced, requires the Treasury Department to regularly review whether companies on U.S. government blacklists, such as Commerce Export Controls, sanctions, DoD lists, whether they should be added to this Treasury CMIC list, the investment blacklist for Chinese military industrial firms. List coordination is necessary to ensure we treat entities consistently. Can you touch on how alignment within these various government prohibitions of Chinese entities eases the compliance burden for U.S. firms to determine whether or not they can invest in China?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great challenges. You don't want to go through the cost of starting a deal or an investment and doing the diligence on it, only to find out that it's going to breach this law. And so it's almost like a CFIUS issue. You don't know the outcome till you test it. And so if there was a better way to do that where, particularly in a larger transaction, where they could just come to staff and say, look, we want to invest $1 billion in this thing. Is it going to pass or not? Or do we actually have to test it?
Yeah, and we have a provision in the bill that would allow for that guidance for investors.
That would be the very best thing to do, because then on a no-names basis, you can just go in and say, look, there's a very material transaction. If you're not okay with it, just tell me now. Because nobody wants to, burdening it with litigation, which has been a problem lately, is not the answer. Just yes or no.
Right.
That's much easier.
Yeah, and I think we threaded that needle by not having kind of a reverse CFIUS, but it's a clear red light, green light system there. Mr. Iacovella, in your testimony, you refer to passive index loophole and state that there are more than 2,000 U.S. mutual and exchange traded funds that have $294 billion invested across Chinese stocks and bonds. The concern, obviously, is that American investors may be unwittingly financing the Chinese military industrial complex. Can you explain how the Fight China Act would curtail that loophole?
I think the Fight China Act would go a long way to curtailing the loophole, but I also think that there needs to be a straight prohibition, because what you'll find is that New York lawyers are going to come down here and they're going to try to create loopholes to the loophole, and they're going to interfere with what it is that you're trying to do, which is very novel, in stopping our money from going and funding the Chinese Communist Party's technological and military rise, as well as their funding of the surveillance state, which aids and abets the internment of Uyghurs. So I think that your bill does a lot, and I think that it goes a long way, but it needs to be much broader because the CCP owns a stake in everything.
Great, thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Congresswoman Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Molinar, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, and Ranking Member Gillibrand for holding today's hearing. And thank you to our witnesses for being here. The topic of today's hearing could not be more urgent. I represent Ohio's 11th District, home to tens of thousands of seniors and retirees who have worked hard, saved, and invested for decades. They deserve to know their hard-earned savings are safe, not evaporating overnight because of a trade war or at risk from foreign adversaries and fraud. Today's threats include everything from shadowy financial schemes backed by the Chinese Communist Party to sophisticated online scams preying on older Americans. These threats require a whole of government and whole of society response. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the essential work of federal agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Department of Justice and the FBI. These agencies are on the front line fighting fraud and financial abuse targeting older Americans. The CFPB has propose bringing big tech and non-bank payment platforms under federal supervision, something that's long overdue. Scammers use these peer-to-peer apps to target seniors, and these platforms operate in a regulatory gray zone. The Bureau's rulemaking would help close the dangerous loopholes. The FTC has also shined a light on scams like romance fraud, tech support cons, and crypto-related schemes, while DOJ's Elder Justice Initiative has gone after the criminal networks behind them. This rise in fraud through payment apps and other digital tools is staggering, and these platforms still fall outside traditional oversight. That's why the CFB's proposals matter. Mr. Finta, given how much elder fraud is occurring on these platforms, how urgent is it for Congress to support CFPB's efforts and close the regulatory gap? And what additional safeguards should we look at to protect seniors as these tools continue to evolve?
I appreciate the question, and you are correct. Each of those agencies has a role to play in the overall process of not only preventing frauds, but going after the folks that do propagate them. I think that's one of the big things that gets lost in the shuffle here to some degree is the lack of enforcement overseas, where a lot of these folks feel like there is no consequence. They're never going to get caught. And that disincentive is incredibly important in the overall plan, the structure. I actually had a conversation with an Indian journalist one time who said, you have to arrest enough people that they think they might be the next one. And that has to happen for this thought process to work. Now, in terms of the regulatory side of things, again, that's outside my area of expertise. However, the regulators in this country, along with the enforcers and private industry, all have to be on the same page for this to actually work. They need to support each other, because $61 billion a year leaving the country out of our elders' accounts and going to foreign countries, some of which who are adversaries, is no trivial amount.
Thank you. Instead of closing the door on scammers and fraudsters, Republicans want to reopen it and let them in by overturning the CFBP's rule to regulate payment platforms. I am glad that all Senate Democrats voted against overturning this Biden administration rule, and I will do the same next week. Still, the scale of the threat demands more. The FBI reports that Americans over the age of 60 lost more than $3.4 billion to fraud in 2023, up 11% from the year before. And we know that this is likely an undercount because many cases go unreported out of fear, embarrassment, or shame. These tactics, from pig butchering crypto scams to grandparent schemes, are designed to be deeply personal and emotionally manipulative. At the same time, many seniors' retirement savings are being funneled into CCP-linked firms, often without their knowledge, through passive investment structures. That includes companies using corporate shells designed to evade both China's and U.S. investment protections, and firms tied to military and surveillance industries through CCP's Made in China 2025 strategy. We need to shed light on these investments and make sure our system isn't helping the Chinese Communist Party exploit retirees. That means increased transparency for investors, and it means greater support for federal enforcement. Mr. Leary, with my few minutes, you spoke about how millions of Americans are unknowingly exposed to Chinese firms through passive index funds. What specific steps can Congress take to help investors, especially seniors, clearly understand where their retirement dollars are going?
To ban the use of VIEs, which are a structure used for what I would call a faux share. These get indexed. In other words, you think you own a stock certificate with a voting right to it. When you don't, it goes to a Cayman structure. I don't know why we would allow that to go into anybody's pension plan. I mean, this is a shadow share is what it is, and yet we allow it. And the other is to actually just enforce existing laws around the golden share, because you know, if you hold a company, just make an easy example, you have $100 in an index fund, and you've got 10 companies, $10 in each one, and one of them just goes to zero, and there's many examples of these Chinese golden share companies just going to zero, and you don't know why. You've basically lost, the value of that index is now $95. And why put it in there in the first place? And even if the law allows to have, I don't know how that's going to happen, but you know, we've been talking today about delisting all these companies, and I think that might be happening soon. But sprinkled out throughout all of our indexing and all of our pension and all of the diversification through the system that we have built that has protected seniors' investments for decades, we've let this cancer creep into it. And to stop this, it's to simply enforce the existing laws and add new ones. I don't want to own a VIE if I'm an indexed pensioner. Why would I want to own that? A Cayman shadow share from a company with a super preference. I mean, it's so just not what they should own that we just should say, sorry, the answer is no, you can't put that in this index. It's just a simple applying the existing laws and fine tuning to remove the tumor that's in there. This is a cancerous tumor in our financial services system, and we have good doctors here. So chop, chop, let's just cut them out.
My time has expired. Thank you for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. O'Leary, just to follow up on that discussion, the Trump administration is having an ongoing review of ERISA standards to ensure that foreign adversary companies are ineligible for pension plan contributions. You've been talking a lot about these issues, the lack of investor safeguards, the geopolitical risk, the lack of the ability to do diligence on some of these things. You just mentioned the, shadow shares. And I guess, when you talk about VIEs, what percent of investors are even aware of this? What percent of financial advisors or people in this business who are advising seniors would even be aware of this? And I'd like to ask all of you this question.
The majority of index funds or ETFs are administered by fiduciaries inside large distribution companies, like a Fidelity or a Schwab, and their job is to be compliant. And so it's very rare that they ever go rogue and put anything into an index that is not permitted by law.
Right.
And so it's just a matter of making sure that we give them good definition of what is not permitted, and they will comply. 99% of them will comply. So we've built in great safeguards for this stuff. We just haven't really implemented or made them obvious enough, because when you ask how many investors, if I took 10 people in the hall outside here and asked them, do you know what a VIE is? They'd say no.
Right.
Do you own one? I have no idea what that is.
Right.
It is not a real share, and we have let Chinese companies rig or take advantage of the system we've provided and the lack of enforcing it to get to this extreme point. And I don't know the exact amount. I'm going to guesstimate that how many Chinese companies listed on NASDAQ and NYSE. I'm going to guess between 700 and 800 billion worth of market cap. Majority of them should be delisted if we enforce the laws as they should be enforced. And many of them, in my guess, would say, wait a minute, I'm sorry I didn't get it done in the last 24 months, but I am going to hire American counsel. I'm going to get compliant. And it would be a great first step, because you would force the transparency, and then I used to be in the ETF business. Every single firm that distributed it, we had to go through the whole compliance process. It cost millions of dollars. But the system works. If you want to index, you got to make sure that you know what you're putting in there, because other people are relying on and trusting you to do it. And we've been talking all day about how we're actually eroding the system by not enforcing these laws, because people, when they start to learn about shadow shares and VIEs, are saying, what the hell is this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, why is it in here?
But I guess what I'm wondering is, let's say, I'm someone who has an account at Fidelity or some other, and I go to my financial advisor and I'm trying to get advice on this. Would they even know VIEs? Would they just simply say this is?
No, they rely on their compliance departments. Some do. Some RIAs and some advisors do, but not many. They just rely on the system, and so you got to make sure the system works.
We got to change the system.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Iacovella.
Yeah, if the VIEs are in an index fund, then it's the obligation of the fiduciary to track the index fund, and that's what they do. And the CCP, it's been reported, they pressured MSCI and others to actually expand the percentage of Chinese companies that go in these index funds, and they'll continue to do it. And the VIE structure, there's no economic rights, there's no voting rights, there's no control over the board. And then these companies get to list in our marketplace. And one of the largest risks that we haven't talked about, if Kevin sells his shares of his public company, what do you have to do? You have to disclose it immediately, right? They don't have to do that. A foreign insider can sell all of their shares in the company from day one to day two, and you're not going to know about it until the stock price just keeps going down as information leaks out. Who gets harmed by that?
Thank you. I yield back.
Congressman Stanton.
All right, thank you very much, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Gillibrand, and of course, Chairman Molinar from the House side, Ranking Member Christian Morthy. This is a very important hearing. I'm glad that you made the time to host us here today. I represent the state of Arizona, which the state that has the unfortunate distinction of having the highest rate of elder fraud in the United States of America. In 2022, more than 3,500 Arizonans were scammed out of $82 million. That's just the scams we know of. Many seniors never report that they have been victimized. The United States government has identified that organized crime in the People's Republic of China are some of the most sophisticated perpetrators of financial fraud. In fact, according to the UN, the majority of pig butchering scams, where fraudsters take their time to earn the trust of the victims and dupe them into sending increasingly larger amounts of money, are perpetrated by these Chinese criminal networks. They prey on fear and isolation. They pose as investors, promising lucrative returns, tech support, law enforcement, romantic partners, friends, and family members. And thanks to the increased use of AI, which can mimic human voices, these scams are becoming more elaborate, more convincing, and harder to detect. The federal government needs to do more in coordination with our international allies to crack down on these criminal enterprises and protect seniors. Mr. Finta, you have spent 2 decades at the FBI working on transnational organized crime. You testified here this morning that U.S. law enforcement does not have the resources to effectively pursue complex transnational elder fraud cases. You may have already covered this, but cover it again. It's worth covering again. Give us a better description of the resources that the Elder Justice Task Force needs now more than ever, especially as law enforcement tries to keep pace with criminals' use of AI and other evolving technologies.
I appreciate that. And I would like to clarify that the FBI, HSI, Secret Service, IRS, CID all have very capable agents who can and do these investigations on a regular basis. The issue there is the volume. It's the number. And while you're working a 18-month, 24-month investigation during that time, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people all being scammed and defrauded during that time frame and losing their life savings. So it's not that it is beyond our capability, it's beyond the resources in terms of the fire hose in the face of these investigations. And yes, if the individual agents and officers and investigators are working these cases, as you work it, you gain more intelligence, which means you need more subpoenas, which you need more time, and you need more analysts, and it grows like that giant spider web that you always see on the wall in TV. The issue here is the aggregation of those cases, essentially with the private sector, to grow those cases quickly and effectively so you can do more of them to provide that disincentive. I don't think we're going to be able to wrest our way out of this problem, but I think it's a giant factor that could contribute to reducing it over time.
Okay, I appreciate the point well made. These last few days have been incredibly volatile with the stock market down more than 10%. With the change in tariff policy, it's coming back up today, thank goodness. But especially for our seniors who may be living off their retirement accounts, that volatility is scary. And fear is something the scammers prey off of. As fear grows, scammers will find easier targets. As retirement accounts shrink, scammers will land harder blows. Mr. Iacovella, can you speak to how fraudsters, how they target American retirement accounts, and how falling victim to one scam will too often make you a target for the next one?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Congressman. One of the things I'd like to follow on what Mr. Finta said is that the public-private partnership in this area is crucial. We need to be able to tell the government exactly how we're being attacked, who's attacking us, and what different sophisticated technologies they're using and methods that they're using in order to get at our customers, because it's our customers who they're attacking. They get in their emails, they reset rules in the emails, they redirect things so people don't even understand what's happening. And it even looks like to our membership that it's coming from their customers.
Yeah.
Then once the customer is scammed, people know about it, and somebody else comes in who probably was part of the scamming and says to them, hey, if you just pay me $1,000, I will help you to try to recover some of the funds that just left the country. That's the first piece. And then it just drags on for a little while longer. Then you get another 1,000, another 1,000. Before you know it, they're out another $10,000 or $15,000 by the same people, and they don't get their money back, and they've been scammed again. And that's exactly what you're talking about follow-on.
All right, thank you very much. Look like Mr. Leary may have were you going to jump in and answer on that as well? Okay. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and participating in this incredibly important discussion on the threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party on U.S. investments. Here's the takeaway for everyone, especially American seniors. Make sure your dollars are not invested in Communist China. I look forward to continuing to work with members across the aisle and down the dais on this very important topic, and hope that today's hearing will resonate with the millions of Americans approaching retirement to take action today to make sure their hard-earned money is safe. If any members have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, their hearing record will be open until next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Thank each of you.